Welcome, everybody. Hi, Linda. Right. It has been brought to my attention that last time I gave the message, I was a little fast. So thank you, Don, for that. I have a stopwatch this time, and he's going to just wave his hands if I need to slow down. So thank you for that. Yeah, so like I said, unfortunately Sheridan couldn't make it this week, so we've swapped weeks. What that also means is we're actually going to swap the messages too. So we're going to talk about the second part of our two-part David series tonight, and then Sheridan will go back earlier. So what that means is, in keeping with our church's tradition of only giving me the easy, lighthearted sermons, we got to talk about sin tonight. Adultery, conspiracy, cover-ups, murder, like all of the light stuff that's like, that people just love to hear in church. So we are going to look at the story of David, and what I'm going to be talking about is the story of David's life after he became king of Israel. So up until that point, I'll do kind of a quick summary. Again, I don't know quite what area Sheridan's going to speak on next week, but just to kind of catch you up, Josh spoke last week about the story of Saul, who disobeyed God's command to kill all the Amalekites and destroy all of their property. And angry with Saul, God then sends the prophet Samuel to anoint a shepherd, David, to be king instead. So we're going to kind of go through the Cliffs Notes version of that story, or the TLDR version if you're too young to remember what Cliffs Notes are. And the basic idea is that David entered Saul's service as an armor bearer and played the lyre to soothe the king. And when war between Israel and the Philistines brewed, the giant Goliath challenged the Israelites to send out a champion to fight him. Saul promises to make whoever can slay Goliath a powerful man, and David takes up the challenge. And this is the story we've probably all heard. David selects a sling and manages to slay the giant. And after unexpectedly defeating Goliath with just a sling, Saul made good on his promise by giving David command of all of his armies. But David's popularity soon caused Saul to fear him and plot his death. And eventually Saul comes to realize that David is to be his successor after Saul dies, and David is indeed anointed king of Israel. He conquers Jerusalem, brings the Ark of the Covenant to the city, and unites the tribes of Israel. So again, that was a very quick summary of a very long period of years. But the reason that I wanted to cover that today is because David is a complicated character. On the one hand, he achieved all of those great things. He did amazing things for the faith. But David is also deeply flawed and committed some pretty horrendous sins, including ones we're going to talk about tonight. So let's talk a little bit about David, what happened, and what his story can teach us. So we're going to focus on one story in particular, the tale of David and Bathsheba from 2 Samuel 11. And there's a lot to unpack here, so what I thought we'd do is read through it in its entirety to get an idea of the story, and then go back through a second time and kind of take a look at little pieces of it here. So here we go. Great. In the spring, at a time when the kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite." Then David sent messages to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Now she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness. Then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David, saying, "I am pregnant." So David sent this word to Joab, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." And Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, "Get down to your house and wash your feet." So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all of his master's servants and did not go down to his house. David was told Uriah did not go home. So he asked Uriah, "Haven't you just come from a military campaign? Why didn't you go home?" Uriah said to David, "The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my lord's men are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house and eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing." Then David said to him, "Stay here one more day, and tomorrow I will send you back." So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. At David's invitation, he ate and drank with him, and David made him drunk. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat amongst his master's servants. He did not go home. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In it, he wrote, "Put Uriah out in front where the fighting is the fiercest. Then withdraw from him so he will be struck down and die." So while Joab had the city under siege, he put Uriah at a place where he knew the strongest defenders were. When the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. Joab sent David a full account of the battle. He instructed the messenger, "When you have finished giving the king this account of the battle, the king's anger may flare up, and he may ask you, 'Why did you get so close to the city to fight?' David, didn't you know that they would shoot arrows from the wall? Who killed Abimelech, son of Jerub-Besheth? Didn't a woman drop an upper millstone on him from the wall so that he died in Thebez? Why did you get so close to the wall? If he asks you this, then say to him, 'Moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead.'" The messenger set out, and when he arrived, he told David everything Joab had sent him to say. The messenger said to David, "The men overpowered us and came against us in the open, but we drove them back to the entrance of the city gate. Then the archers shot arrows at your servants from the wall, and some of the king's men died. Moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead." David told the messenger, "Say this to Joab, don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another. Press the attack against the city and destroy it. Say this to encourage Joab." When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. After the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing David had done displeased. And that last line cracks me up every time because, no kidding, what David did displeased the Lord. Here we have a story of a man who, despite being declared a man after God's own heart, which is how the Bible often describes David, commits some of the most horrendous sins imaginable. He engages in adultery with a married woman. He conspires to cover up the resulting pregnancy. When that doesn't work, he arranges to have the woman's husband killed so he can marry her anyway. And yet this is the same person who was chosen by God to unite the tribes of Israel and is destined to literally begin the lineage into which Jesus will be born. So I don't know about you, but for me, this immediately brings to mind a couple of thoughts. First, I find it another of the many reminders in the Bible that you don't have to be perfect to be a part of God's plan. So many of the characters in the Bible, David included, are flawed and broken and still manage to be a part of God's plan for the world. And as someone who personally is also flawed and broken, I find that incredibly reassuring to know that means I'm not disqualified from being a part of God's plan either. Second, if we are talking about people who aren't perfect, I'm curious what it means to be a man or woman after God's own heart, and I think we'll get to that part a little later. To get there, I think it's important to follow David's story a little more closely. If you do, you might notice that David's sin didn't start with his affair with Bathsheba. As is the case for most of us, when you reach the point where you're committing some pretty egregious sins, chances are it's the culmination of a lot of smaller things that have led up to it. You don't just kind of immediately leap from a righteous life into doing really catastrophic things. It's usually the result of little progressive steps along the way. And this is the big reason why sin is so toxic and so insidious, because it starts small and fairly inoffensively. If you've ever spoken with someone who's committed adultery, it's actually pretty rare to have that be a spontaneous decision out of the blue. Far more often you hear stories about, someone maybe feeling distant from their spouse, there's an attraction to someone else, maybe there's a little flirting, maybe they spend more time together, there's an emotional connection, and then eventually, one day, maybe the idea of having an affair doesn't seem like such a great leap or a bad idea, whereas right at the outset it would have. Similarly, if you've spoken with someone struggling with greed, it's often the same thing. It might even start from a place of good intentions, like I need to save money for emergencies, which to be clear is not a bad thing. But then it turns into, well, most financial advisors will tell you need to have 6 to 12 months of savings, in the event of emergency. And again, that's not a bad thing. That is solid financial advice. But it's so easy to tip over into the realm of excess, isn't it? Saving for a rainy day becomes saving just in case of a worst case scenario. And once your savings are in good shape, then it becomes whether you're investing your money wisely. And wise investing then becomes maximizing your return. And pretty soon, the list of all the things you need money for gets longer and longer. The incentive to make money gets stronger and stronger, and the amount of money you need to make sure that everything's taken care of climbs higher until you don't even realize that earning and spending money has become the idol that you're obsessing with. Sin builds on itself. It's like It's like a snowball that starts as maybe a little pebble at the top of a mountain, and as it rolls downhill, it picks up more snow and more momentum, and over again until it arrives at the bottom of the hill is this massive avalanche of snow with a ton of momentum. And it's so much harder to stop that snowdrift at the very bottom of the mountain than it is at the top when it's small. That's how sin works. There's actually a name for this. It's called inertia. And sorry, Crystal, I know you didn't like all the science stuff in here, but I left it in anyway. In the modern world, the word inertia is defined as a tendency to do nothing or remain unchanged, which I think is a little misleading because we often associate that with idleness or laziness. When you say someone is inert or just sitting there, you're kind of like, they're just not doing anything. Grandpa sitting in his recliner has a lot of inertia because once he's comfortable in that recliner, he's not going to get up for anything short of an emergency. But did you notice the second part of that definition? It also says, or remain unchanged. And if you go all the way back to your high school physical science classes, which for some of us is a longer journey back than others, you might remember a guy named Isaac Newton, and he had these 3 laws of motion, which were the most fundamental building blocks in the scientific field of physics. And his first law, which expresses the principle of inertia, says, every object perseveres in a state of rest or of uniform position in a right line until it is compelled to change by that state by forces impressed thereon. And I think we often miss that second part. Yes, if you're at rest, inertia means that you stay at rest until something acts upon you and causes a change. But if you're already in motion, that also means you're going to stay in motion until something acts upon you or causes a change. In the physical world, if you throw a football, it will eventually land somewhere because forces like gravity act upon the ball to bring the trajectory down. And you've seen how it works. You throw a football and it arcs up and then it comes down again. And that's because gravity pulls it down as it travels. But if you throw a football in outer space where there is no gravity, it will just sail on forever in the same direction until it runs into something else, like a planet or an asteroid. And sin is the same way. Like Josh mentioned in his sermon about Saul last week, if you don't use God's means, you'll never end up at God's ends. And if you're in alignment with God's will, you'll get to where he wants you to be. But if you're out of alignment, even a little bit, inertia will naturally keep carrying you away from God and his plan. As another example, since we're in Orange County, let's use our lovely freeway system that everyone loves as an example. If you're driving up from San Diego, taking the I-5 north, there's a point where I-5 splits and becomes the 405 and goes up the side, right? And if you take the 405, you go through Irvine, Fountain Valley, Long Beach, all the way up to Santa Monica. And if you go up I-5, then you go through Irvine, Santa Ana, Orange, Anaheim, etc. Which means that if your plan is to take the 405 to get to LAX to make a flight, if something causes you to go out of alignment with that plan and you take the 5 freeway instead, you might just end up at Dodger Stadium rather than LAX. And you can kind of see the way that departs, right? It starts off small, and as you're going through Irvine, it's not too far away and there's still time to kind of turn, but as you get up into LA, it's so much farther apart, it's harder to get back onto the track you want. It takes you longer. So if you don't do anything to course correct, that divergence will just get wider and wider until all of a sudden one day you're wondering how this vast chasm developed between where you're supposed to be and where you're actually standing. Sin will always be that thing that tries to distract you from remaining in alignment with God. Sin will always try to tempt you into thinking that doing things your own way isn't really that big a deal. And sin is always trying to get that initial little pebble rolling downhill so that it can start building momentum into a giant avalanche that comes crashing down on you at the bottom of the hill. In David's case, though, you can trace God's intention for in David's case, even though you can trace God's intention for monogamous relationships all the way back to Genesis 2:24, David decides early on to enjoy the passions that life has to offer. In fact, in a few chapters earlier in 2 Samuel chapter 3, and you can put this on the screen, we read, sons were born to David in Hebron. His first was Amnon, the son of Anuam of Jezreel. His second was Kileab, the son of Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. The third, Absalom, son of Maacah, daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. The fourth, Adonijah, the son of Haggith. The fifth, Shephatiah, the son of Abital. And the sixth, Ithream, the son of David's wife, Elgah. These were born to David in Hebron. And just out of curiosity, what do you notice about that list? David has 6 sons, but what else does he have 6 of? There's also 6 mothers, one for each of the children, which means that David ignored God's plan for human relationships in a monogamous setting by engaging in polyamory with multiple wives and concubines. And maybe it was just a little voice in his head reassuring him that he deserves these pleasures, that he's meant to be king and he's God's chosen, so why shouldn't he enjoy all that life has to offer him, even if maybe it doesn't, 100% do what God might want. He's still a good guy and meant for great things. And whatever the reason, this shows that sin has already started to find purchase in David's heart. But then we get some insight into other areas of his life where he's compromising. And this is where we kind of go back through the story a little bit. So in the very first verse of today's passage, it says, "In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem." And right there in the first sentence, it says, "In the spring, at the time when the kings go off to war." And yet here we find King David hanging around Jerusalem while Joab leads the army out for him. And it's not the first time he's done this either. In a chapter earlier in 2 Samuel 10, even though we don't have it on the screen, verse 7 tells us that David sent Joab out with the entire army of fighting men to confront the Ammonites. So here we have an example of a king expected to lead his nation out to war, lead them in battle, and he's staying behind in Jerusalem while he sends someone else out to do that for him. So we see David, in small but significant ways, living out of alignment with God's plan for him as king of Israel. And that separation leaves enough room for that sin to fester and grow into a much bigger deal. So then in 2 Samuel 11, 2-5, it says, "One evening David got up from bed and walked around the roof of the palace. From there he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone out to find out. The man said, 'She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite.' Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Now she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness. Then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David, saying, 'I am pregnant.'" And there's a couple of things about this part of the story that I think are relevant. One, some might wonder why the part was added about Bathsheba's monthly uncleanness. It seems like an unnecessary graphic detail at first, but I think that was included for a very specific reason, which is to make it clear that Bathsheba wasn't already pregnant when David. The author is telling us that David is definitely the father, no question about it, because Bathsheba wasn't pregnant before their encounter, and her husband Uriah hasn't been home to visit her in some time because he's off. So I think it's the author's way, even though it's a little strange to read, of saying this is very clearly David's child. The other thing that I thought was interesting about this was it got me wondering, what kind of a person gets up from his bed in the middle of the night and walks around? And to me, it seems like the kind of person who's restless, maybe even the kind of person who wasn't sleeping well because he already knew he was doing something. And I'm curious, have you ever been in that situation where you can't sleep because you're wrestling with a poor choice you've made about something? That seems like what David was experiencing here. Whatever the reason may be, though, one thing is certain, and that's if David were where he should be, off leading the army, he wouldn't have even been in this position to see Bathsheba and get. And so what we see is David's indiscretions up until this point, culminating in this defining moment of his life where he's committed truly mortal sins. And in verses 6 through 13, then we watch what he does after that, which unfortunately is not owning up to his mistakes and atoning, but instead trying to convince Bathsheba's husband Uriah to go home and sleep with his wife so he can cover up the fact that the child is his. And that's the thing, is 6 through 13, there was a lot of send me Uriah, go to your house, wash your feet. And the way that all of that played out was David was trying to get Uriah to go home and sleep with his wife, because if Uriah sleeps with Bathsheba, then he can say, "Oh, like you're pregnant, it must be yours." But because if he can just get Uriah to sleep with Bathsheba before anyone realizes she's pregnant, then they can cover this whole thing up. But it's one of those things where like he's now trying to cover up his sin. He didn't just commit a sin; he's trying to actively find a way to get out of it. And while I hope that the specifics of David's situation are something that none of us here have ever experienced, man, how true does that behavior ring to you? How often do we in our lives do something that we know is wrong, but then instead of atoning for it or admitting we're wrong, we double down, we try to brush it off, we cover it up, we just pretend like nothing ever happened. And I can't help but think, we always do that, but how often does that end well for us, rather than just owning up to what we've done? But this story seems intent on taking it to the next level, so David's not done yet. When Uriah proves unwilling to accept special treatment to go home and have relations with his wife, while the rest of the soldiers have to stay where they are, David realizes that a ruse won't work, so he goes even further. And then in verses 14 to 17 is literally trying to plan to have him killed at war so that he'll die and he can have Bathsheba. So just like that, we've gone from polyamory and sloth to adultery to conspiracy to murder, which he then tops off by marrying Bathsheba when this is all over. And I should probably point out that if you pay close attention to the last verse in the chapter, you'll notice that it ends with David bringing Bathsheba to his house, marrying her, and bearing that son, which means that everything that has happened in the last 9 months. So in the span of 9 months, he had an affair, he tried to cover it up, he tried to have the husband killed, married the mother, and had the son. So I think, again, at the end, the thing that David had done has displeased the Lord, which, no kidding. By the end of the chapter, we're given a pretty clear image that David is not exactly a great role model. Despite his success, he has some very serious personal failings, and he makes real bad choices when faced with the consequences of those actions. And here's where I really wrestled with this passage, because if David is this flawed, this sinful, how could he possibly be a man after God's own heart? What does that even mean? And I think we find that out in what happens next. In 2 Samuel 12, again, I'm not going to put the verse on, but a quick summary is the Lord sends Nathan to rebuke David and call him out on his sins. Again, we're not going to put the chapter up tonight, but in a nutshell, Nathan goes to David, does that thing where he proposes like a quote-unquote hypothetical situation, and then when David takes the bait and agrees that the man in the hypothetical is a jerk, he goes, I was talking about you. That's obviously about you. And this is where I think we get to the real crux of the issue, because when David realizes that what Nathan is telling him, David admits he sinned against the Lord and repents. And then he's faced with the consequences of his actions when the child he conceived with Bathsheba out of wedlock dies, but he accepts it and gets back into alignment with God's plan. That's when he and Bathsheba are blessed with another son, this one named Solomon, and this is the one who will continue the story. So I think it's important to note here that there were consequences for David's choice. Repentance is necessary in order to receive mercy and forgiveness, but that doesn't mean that we're necessarily free from the consequences of our actions. David accepted those consequences and still moved on with eyes and heart set firmly back on God. And then God, in return, continues to uphold his promise to David. So as I was writing this message, I spent a lot of time thinking about what it must have meant for David to get back into alignment with God's plan at that point. It's one of those things that I think is easy to say in the abstract. It's like, oh, just get back on the same page with God. But I think it's really hard to figure out what that means in practical terms. But in David's case, we do have some clue, because David is author of fully half of the book of Psalms. And there's one psalm in particular, Psalm 51, that is literally subtitled, "For the director of music, a psalm of David, when the prophet Nathan came to him after David had committed adultery with Bathsheba." So in this case, we know what David's prayer was when all this was happening. We know what he was wrestling with. And here is the text of Psalm 51. David prayed, "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love, according to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash away my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. Against you, you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. So you are right in your verdict and justified when you judge. Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. Yet you desired faithfulness even in the womb, and you taught me wisdom in that secret place. Clean me with hyssop, and I will be clean. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones you have crushed rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all of my iniquity. Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me from your presence or take me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me. Then I will teach transgressors your way so that sinners will come back to you. Deliver me from the guilt of bloodshed, O God, you who are God my Savior, and my tongue will sing of your righteousness. Open my lips, Lord, and my mouth will declare your praise. You do not delight in sacrifice, or I would bring it. You do not take pleasure in burnt offerings. My sacrifice, O God, is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. You, God, will not despise. May it please you to prosper Zion, to build the walls of Jerusalem. Then you will delight in the sacrifices of the righteous, in burnt offerings offered whole, and offered on your altar. And there are two parts of this psalm that really stand out to me. One, I think it's remarkable how David is fully honest with God about the ways in which he talks about how he admits what he's done. He talks about how he doesn't deserve, he deserves to be judged. And that kind of honesty, I think, is rare. He also brings all of that to God and earnestly asks God for mercy and restoration. And it's funny because that's it. That's the simple recipe, right? Is to be a man or a woman after God's own heart isn't about being perfect. It's not about living a life beyond reproach or making zero errors in judgment. David's considered a hero of the faith and did far worse in 9 months than most of us managed to do in a lifetime. But the important thing is that he owned up to it and he made efforts to get back into alignment with God. And I find that reassuring on a personal level because it means that all of us in this room can also be men or women after God's own heart. To those people, we have to bring our sin to God, own it, and ask him to have mercy on us in his infinite love and compassion. And I say that knowing that it's easier said than done. Like David, we all have a tendency to find justifications for our choices and actions even when we know what we're doing is wrong. And like David, many of us will go to great lengths to try to cover up our failings rather than to own up. Owning up to mistakes, especially big ones, is hard, but as the story of David and Bathsheba teaches us, and as I can personally attest to in my own life as well, trying to cover up rather than own up to your failings only makes things worse and only keeps us on that same inertial trajectory away from God. That's why I think the Bible and why this space on Sundays are so important. The chance to remind ourselves over and over again what it looks like to be on the same trajectory as God. If you ever have questions about what that looks like, you only have to look at the life of Jesus to see what the template is. That's what God gave us. He gave us an example of how we're supposed to live our life. And if you ever get out of alignment with God's plan or how Jesus lived, you can be reassured that even in stories as dark as the one we look at today, God is merciful and he's good to those who earnestly seek him, admit that they failed, and ask to reconcile with him. So, to sum up, I think, how do I do on time, Don? It's like 25 minutes. I'm pretty, a little fast still. So in the interest of getting us back all into alignment with God, as Tim comes back up to lead us through one last song of worship, I do want to create some space for all of us to do just that. So if I could get everyone to please stand and bow your heads with me and extend your hands. I just want to offer a prayer for anyone who is struggling with whatever sin you have. So I just want to say, God, for everyone here today who wants to bring whatever sin they're carrying with you and lay at your feet, today we offer a paraphrase of the same prayer that David offered you in Psalm 50. We say, have mercy on us, O God, wash away our iniquities and cleanse us of our sins. We know what we've done, and you're justified in judging us for it. Please create in us pure hearts and renew steadfast spirits within us. Our sacrifice, O God, are broken and contrite hearts, and we ask that you restore us to the joy of your salvation. Open our lips, Lord, and our mouths will declare your praise.